And
there we go. We are.
Power.
Fantastic. Am I starting? Am I? Yeah. Okay, I'm starting. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to this session. We are intending today to have an interactive discussion session, so we'll be talking a little bit, but then we will be asking for your contributions and the people online as well. So yeah, we really appreciate you coming today to be involved in this session. Do you want to clicker?
Oh, sorry. We know I'm not good at clickers. Why did we put
All right.
the clicker studio?
Well,
oh, yeah.
there we go.
Okay, there we go. So we would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands we're meeting on today and acknowledge that we're on Ngunnawal country, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. And we'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations where we live and work most of the time. Yes, we will continue?
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to start today by introducing ourselves and I guess our interest and work in this area of trauma and archives broadly. Yeah, we'll go through how the session's going to be run and then we'll provide a bit of background about the work that's been done to date and sort of to lead into the discussions. And yeah, so I guess I'll introduce myself and then we can go down the line.
Do it.
All right. So I'm Kirsten. For those who don't know me, I'm Kirsten Wright. I work on the Find and Connect web resource at the University of Melbourne. And for me, I have not been involved in this space as long as Michaela and Nicola both have, but it was really through the work on Find and Connect that I sort of came to ideas around trauma-informed practice and saw their applicability to archives. I've obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious, I have always been interested in ideas of like archives and power and changing those dynamics and yeah, how can archives work for people, not against people. And I guess I saw in the archival literature, there was a lot of discussions of these topics, whether it was archives for social justice, archives for human rights, all of these sorts of really quite revolutionary and important ideas, but that wasn't necessarily being reflected in archival practice. And so I guess I found trauma-informed practice quite a useful model to bridge that gap between the theory and practice, or a way to enact some of the ideas and issues discussed in the literature. So yeah, I'm sure we'll go through sort of what we've done since, but that's sort of my background and what I'm bringing to this discussion.
Thanks. I'll go next. Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Michaela Hart. I'm a Senior Digital Archivist at the Department of Health in a role that also supports the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing now. My role, so as alluded to by Kirsten, Nicola and I first gave a paper on vicarious trauma at this conference in Melbourne in 2017. And at that time we were fairly new professionals and we knew we needed to talk about it. We knew we were also taboo busting in a way to raise the idea of affect in our profession. But obviously we were having the right conversation at the right time because since then the conversation has been able to connect us globally with a whole bunch of other conversations, and there's been a really big groundswell and support for the work that is being continued by these two as I step away to talk about climate. But we're not there yet. So this is why we're here. We need to draw a line now and say what's next for our profession, how can we continue to support. And I'll be here talking a bit about the initiatives that I've developed, that I've built within my team at the Department of Health, and also as we reflect a little bit on where we've come from. So over to you.
Hi everyone. As I think has been explained, I'm Nicola. Nicola Laurent, and I work with Kirsten on the Find and Connect web resource as the Senior Project Archivist, but I did come to this topic, with Michaela, I guess, and it's where we started looking at it often from an emotional labour point of view, as well as vicarious trauma, and then we kind of have moved on to trauma-informed archival practice, and it's been in the creation of resources and doing further work to research and understand this area that I guess I have done more in recent years. But I'm going to leave it at that for the minute.
Did you want to do the trauma?
I was kind of, can I go off script for a second?
Absolutely.
And just say we've got a small group and we want to warm them up.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone's here and actually wants to say hi and introduce themselves and why they're here and what they want to get out of this session, is there anyone that feels like doing that? Awesome.
And anyone online, you can put it in the chat,
Yeah.
and we have our
So
phones
we're
here,
gonna
so that we're also
be-
monitoring that too.
We'll be looking at our phones, not because I want to see how my last session did on Twitter. But
Mic one, please. It's on.
Hello. Chatham House Rules here and on the web, please. My name's Cate Dethridge. I'm a curator of photographs at the Australian War Memorial. Sorry to clarify, photographs, film and sound. Myself and my colleague Emma, who sits next to me, who's also a curator, we deal daily in our image and film and sound archive with trauma. In both the visual sense, the oral history sense, and what is projected from not only veterans but refugees and all sorts of people, stakeholders we deal with every day. We have been stalking your discussion for a couple of years now, as you know, and the memorial finally reached out earlier this year. Thank you. So I guess for us it's a conversation, and I think what Michaela said about taboo busting is very important for staff at the memorial, particularly in the last 12 months to 2 years. It's grounded in staff wishing to make a change rather than senior management, which is partially generational, and systems that have been placed in both public service, the Australian Defence Force and many other areas. Further to that, certain announcements recently, as most of us would be aware of, to do with Frontier Wars, has also put another perspective on this, and we're desperate to learn. We're desperate to learn, I guess in a selfish sense, in our own instance, for our own mental health, but also to ensure in moving forward that in the future this becomes front and centre in terms of archival practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we had a colleague at that first paper. We had one of your colleagues there who spoke about in our reflection space about the work that was happening at the War Memorial. So I'm really glad to hear that you're here today, part of the conversation still. Thanks.
Yeah. Did anyone else want to introduce themselves or say why they're here or what they were hoping to discuss? You absolutely don't have to, but if you want to, you're very welcome.
That's great. Oh, okay.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Roz. I work at the National Library, also mostly with pictures, but also manuscripts material. We also have a lot of trauma in our archives that I don't think we're prepared for, that we stumble across both staff and readers that come into the library. So trying to think about ways that we can protect ourselves and protect our visitors so we don't get upset.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Violet, there we go. So it helps if I already know their names.
Well, I'm Violet. I just want to kind of bring up, maybe we can talk about it later, but those archivists or record keepers who might have lived experience and the difference that is between being an archivist who can step away from the records versus people who are actually living these things. And I know statistically that has to be the case. So that's why I'm here today.
Thanks, Violet. And that's a reminder, like Violet and I started this conversation
I've just
yesterday.
made a
We're going to
note.
stick to the agenda.
No, we're not sticking to. No, not at all. I'm just saying I made a note
yeah,
of Violet so we can pick it up later on.
I would
in
like
the
to pick
discussion.
that up.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Making a note.
All right, great. You're awesome.
Very interactive, guys.
Well, we should say, just before we do get going, we do usually, when we're talking about issues of trauma and affect in archives, we do like to say up front, this isn't the sort of place to judge what anyone thinks is traumatic or that they have a distressing reaction to. Everyone's experiences are different. People bring different lived experience, as Violet's indicated, to their situations and to the records and archives that they deal with. So, yeah, we want this to be a safe and non-judgmental space for sharing and reflecting on your experiences, I guess. So, yeah, just like to say that up front. I think we can go to the next slide, right? So yeah, I mean, you kind of already talked a little bit about the 2017 conference paper or the conference session really. It was like a paper that then turned into this big discussion session, but I don't know if you want to reflect more on that, and not just the paper itself, but certainly my observation. So I was there at the session, but I didn't present, I wasn't part of it. My observations were it wasn't just at the session, it was afterwards people were coming up to you and sharing experiences as well. So I don't know if you want to...
And they haven't stopped.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit.
Okay, I'll start. One of the things we did was the person that we were co-presenting with bailed out at the last minute, or wasn't able to present at the last minute. Sorry, so we were faced with going from a 45-minute session to a 90-minute session at short notice, and so we seized the opportunity and we quickly reworked it. We pulled in Dr. Cate O'Neill, to help do some extra sharing and help construct a bigger narrative. And then we also made the decision to turn off the mics, turn off the recording, and actually just facilitate a conversation. And at that point in time, we were at the end of the Child Sex Abuse Royal Commission that many of us had worked on for years, and the lecture theatre was full of archivists who'd been doing that alone for all of that time and were really traumatised. And that was reflected in the way that people shared that day. Yeah. And
I don't think either, well, I don't want to speak for both of us. I certainly wasn't prepared for the response we got.
No.
I don't think we expected people to be so open in sharing their experiences at that time because, like you said, Michaela, we hadn't heard other people share before, really, in such a professional setting anyway. Like, we definitely peer support shared and things like that, but not standing at a conference and having a room full of people and going, yeah, me too, like this is impacting me as well. And that's really what happened. And then, like Michaela said, it really did continue on afterwards from that. There was a lot of momentum that came out of that conversation, and there was a clear call for action as well to say we need support, we need resources, and as a profession we have to respond to that. We can't just start a conversation and then not take action based off that.
And I think I'll just follow on from that. What we realised after that talk was also that what we really wanted was to start having conversations with our colleagues around the world, because we didn't want these things to happen in silos. And we knew that some North American colleagues were starting to talk about it. And then the call for papers went out for the North Carolina conference on feminist ethics and radical empathy, and we were like, it was a week before Christmas, and we were messaging each other going, we have to go. Yeah. So we threw out a paper together, and then we spent like 50 hours flying to North Carolina for 3 days for what was the most amazing conference to be able to continue that conversation. And from there we went to Glasgow, and then we did the same thing there, and we didn't get T-shirts made. We were going to for the trauma tour, but it meant that all of the things that have happened now, we have the Discord group, which is the global community of practice that was mentioned in the introduction, that we'll talk a bit more about later, means that we have a space when we get still frequently contacted via Twitter, by social media, from archivists who haven't heard about the work that's been done, new professionals who haven't been told it during their education, who reach out to find us. Now there's a space for us to send them. But we want to talk a little bit more about what resources might be required that can be available.
And Nicola, do you just quickly want to mention, I guess, the ASA response out of that conference paper?
Sure.
Well, because you were on council at the time, were you?
I was,
Yeah.
yes.
I'm just going to check the...
Oh, you're checking the thing. It's all right. We're all It's a multi-purpose
Very busy.
approach. So I guess, yes, I did feel like a responsibility, I guess, in terms of bringing that session to a conference and then being there as an ASA counsellor as well, and listening to that real need for the profession to respond and going, well, we're the professional association, we need to take action as well. And so it was really fortunate timing in that the ASA was really keen to be working on some online courses, and they were very open to what they were going to be on and things. So we were really fortunate that we were able to put in to actually create one of the online courses on trauma-informed archival practice. And it did take us a little while to write it, I think. So that was Kirsten and I who wrote that course. But we did interview people as part of that course, and Michaela was one of the people we interviewed, whose voices included.
The expert interviews.
Yes, the expert interviews. You know, and I think, I mean, it was a really eye-opening experience writing that course as well. We got to do a lot of more research into it. We certainly explored different professions and how they looked at trauma-informed practice and how they'd been able to implement it in their professions and their practice, and how it was so applicable to the archives and how it really brought many different things together. And I think it was when we were writing that course that we really were able to we started to kind of change the way we spoke about the topic, and we wanted it to be with a focus on more on the users of archives, I guess, and not solely that. Obviously, we wanted to support the archivists, but we wanted to make sure that everything we were doing was going to make the archive safer for everyone. So it wasn't just a one-sided approach to who we were trying to support and why we were trying to make this change. So another resource that the ASA did put out was just a one-pager on vicarious trauma, and that is more specifically for obviously people working in the profession, but that was in direct response to someone getting in touch with me and saying, we know you have this great resource and this great thing, but you know, when I needed immediate support, I went to the ASA website and I couldn't find anything immediately because it's kind of all in the course. So it's really short and sharp, and it just pulls out some of the key things, and it just gives you an indication of if you're having a trauma reaction, what a few steps that you can take in that first process. And I guess the online course is more of a preventative measure.
Yeah.
And then we currently have a workshop.
We do have a workshop. Do you want to go to the next slide, actually?
can do that.
I feel like that's a good thing to do, because the next slide should tell us some of... Oh, it doesn't. There you go.
Was there another slide?
There might not have been another slide. I thought there was another slide.
There's not another
That's right.
That's not another slide.
There's not another
Gone
slide.
back to background, it seemed like.
Okay, but yeah, just to highlight that there are definitely many more resources available today. There is the online course. We are now running workshops which sort of complement the online course, which really delve into what does trauma-informed practice mean for, you know, your organisation, what's some action items you can take back for your organisation, you know, because it's all different. What works in one place won't work in another place, but yeah, it's really focused on having those discussions and I guess assessing your organisation, and yeah, thinking of things you can do both in the short term and the longer term, and in the profession more broadly as well. And yeah, as Michaela said, we have an international community of practice which meets sort of quarterly, roughly. Sadly, usually at a quite inconvenient times for Australia. It's often quite early in the morning, but that's so that we can also obviously talk to our colleagues in North America and Europe. And they're usually themed meetings, so we generally have a theme for the meeting, and sometimes there's speakers or we just have a general topic. And yeah, the Discord group also has resources, so there's lots of resources there now that people have shared. There is a space to get support if you've had a distressing experience. There's some sort of regional specific discussion areas. So that's been really, really good to do as well. Just in the interest of time, I think I am... Yeah, we're running late already and we haven't even really started. Let's ask some questions. So yeah, I guess where we're coming to is to say there's a lot more resources available, and there's a lot more, you know, stuff out there in the literature and around, hopefully, we hope. But has that actually led to any changes in archivists' work? Because it's sort of interesting that one of the first things people say they want is training, which is great, and you have to, that's the place to start, obviously, but how does that then impact people's work? So I guess I would really be curious. I mean, you can speak, Michaela, but then to the general discussion if anyone has any reflections on that.
Well, I guess maybe I'll see if there's anyone that wants to jump their hand in the air first, but otherwise I can. So in terms of our work, my director gave me the mandate of like, well, if we can't do it right when we've got you, then who's going to? So I got given a very long rope to actually really design the most trauma-informed space that we can. We still don't have it right though. I've got a slide I think which is next, but which I'll talk about that. But the reality is my work, or our work in the Department of Health and Department of Families, Fairness and Housing isn't going to change. Like we still have to access the same materials. We have to use our trauma-informed lens to provide access to those records to the right people. So this slide is our best practice at the moment. This is an evolving thing. So this is part of my strategic plan for archival services for the Department of Health. I've got, just for some context, I've got 3 archivists working in my team, but we've got about 60 people working in records management in our unit. And a lot of those are accessing materials at a different degrees. We've got a digitisation team. So what we want to do, we do now is we provide vicarious trauma material on induction. We actually, to take that back now, we've started discussing it in interview so that people know what types of records they're going to be expected to be working with. And that helps some people sort of self-select out of the process if they don't think they're the right person for that job. Provide vicarious trauma training. So we have in-house vicarious trauma training that is designed for frontline workers. We have child protection practitioners and professionals like that in the department that the VT training is necessarily designed for. So I do a top-up training for our staff that's very much based around what are our specific needs as record keepers. In the weekly checklist is an evolving space. So look, I'm still trying to figure out what the right mechanism it is for, but it was built from the Child Sex Abuse Royal Commission's frontline staff got given a weekly checklist that asked some very specific questions around well-being, just as red flags, so that you can start thinking, you know, we know the vicarious trauma creeps up on you. You're resilient until you're not resilient anymore. So having some things in place to actually help you to sort of put some things in place are good. So we normalise discussions. It's a very weird and difficult place to tread, to discuss as a manager my own mental health with my staff, and to do that in a professional way, but while still being transparent and bringing my whole self. You know, I don't know if I've got that right, but still trying. And then some of the practical things, like, you know, we give people an opportunity to swap out work if it's possible. So there's all of the things that are available. We have content warnings on next session briefings, those sorts of things. And just finally, I'm hoping that I can and my staff will be able to get clinical supervision if possible. It's not something I've had before, but I'm at the point now where I've realised that I need it. So, anyone else? Hi. Microphone's coming. Thanks.
In our organisation, we've, sorry, I'm Julie, and I'm from Knox Grammar School, and we've just put in a vicarious trauma policy, which I've written, and we're getting another organisation called Blue Knot to actually go through that and make sure that it is, but I thought I'd start the ball rolling. And I think in terms of we're actually going through, we're going to have some trauma-informed organisational change, so we're actually going to be a trauma-informed organisation in time, very slowly, but I think anybody who has to deal with trauma, I think that's an important step to make.
Excellent.
Are you able to talk a bit about what your vicarious trauma policy covers? I'm just really curious.
So it basically is sort of and essentially I've just looked up there, and it's really interesting because I've covered a lot of those things as well. So it covers that if somebody is interviewed for a job and it involves child protection matters, that they're actually made well aware of that. We provide training for anybody who has to do anything to do with that. There is, what's the next thing? Training. Then there is supervision. There is, for example, there's people working buddies, so they might have if they have to do anything to do with child protection, they have somebody else they can actually just share with. And people who check in on them, that kind of thing. So it goes through a whole, I guess the whole, basically everything you've got on there is in the policy, and it's just so that there's, I guess, good practice for individuals before they even step into that space.
Thank you. We're just looking at the questions online as well. And
There's a question about, sorry. I'm adding microphones to the list of accessibility things.
Yes.
How does one secure extra resources? I've been finding that budget cuts seem to be affecting the heritage sector across the board, and it is a good question.
It's a great question. Yeah.
When our budgets are already stretched to deliver on, our core archival.
Yeah. This might, we can, I feel like that segues us nicely into the next question. So I feel like if anyone else wants to talk to the first question around, has their practice changed? Is there good things they want to share? Violet.
While the microphone comes, by the way, OH&S, we need it to be an OH&S risk.
That's what I'm...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Violet again. I was just thinking about something that, and that's even about resources as well, but something that at Good Shepherd we implemented was reflective practice sessions where we would have a couple of hours, and this was team-led. We didn't have management support at the time. We just thought we're struggling, and I'm very lucky to work with social workers and counsellors, so it was at their suggestion that we run these 2-hour reflective sessions with art therapy components and things like that, which has been fantastic, and we probably run them every 6 weeks, so that's just a great thing. Thanks.
Thanks, Violet. Did anyone else? Oh, yeah, Stuart.
I'll actually ask a question myself, so I'll give myself the mic. My name's Stuart Bennington from the Australian War Memorial. I'm the curator of official records there. I can't speak for the rest, but you probably can very quickly. For the first time this year when we ran some interviews, we included a question about trauma and how do people go about dealing with trauma and that, because it's come more and more on our radar. I attended that session back in 2017 at Melbourne, which was very good. So that brought it onto our radar for us, because especially in fact, you mentioned those who'd been dealing with children's abuse and that, and I remember they were sitting right there next to me talking practically over my shoulder, so that sort of struck me a lot. So yeah, we've included that as well as attending the ASA's workshops that you did, but we also have had our own vicarious trauma workshops. I'm just going to ask, a bit rude of me, but I'm just going to ask, Photos from Sound, have you asked any questions? Always, there you go. So, and it makes sense.
Once again is a team, that once again has been a team-generated decision based on trauma over, I've been there 15 years, so we've seen it, so it's just naturally been...
So we're getting a theme here, aren't we, about stuff being team-led?
Yeah.
So,
can I just, one other thing in terms of that. It's about aggregating data as well. Like we talk about how we're doing forms and doing red flags, but where is the data actually aggregated to flag on a greater organisation level that this is happening?
Yes.
Like organisations are quick to go in a survey, are you being bullied? It's that OHS thing, but never is it, have you or are you experiencing organisational trauma in the past 12 months or whatever?
That's a really good point.
Yes.
You know, it's
Can you write that down? I don't have, yeah. Good. Thank you.
I mean, I'm just scribbling these notes. To say I'm writing them down is, I am, but yeah. But that does lead us really well into the second area we wanted to talk about, was are archivists experiencing more support from their organisations regarding trauma, emotional labour and affect? And yeah, what does that ongoing support look like? And already so many people here have spoken about how what they're doing was team-led. It was from the ground up. It was because people decided this was an important thing to do, and so they did it. And I'm really interested, and I need to think through how do we sort of do that, both bottom-up and top-down change, and get like those really senior managers, the CEOs and directors of organisations, what do they need to know in this space, and yeah, how can they best, support their staff? And being able to go to a training program is great. That's again, step one, letting your staff do a training, fantastic. But like that can't be the end of it, obviously. And so yeah, I'm sort of keen to look at the workshop that we've developed and see how we would rejig that for that really top tier management and what that would look like. And then I think that also goes to the resourcing question as well, because this, in my mind, is an OH&S issue. It's a workplace safety issue. We talk about manual handling. We talk about, again, having appropriate equipment so you can lift things and get boxes off the shelves and all that stuff. But in my mind, this is, just as important organisational risk. And so whether I think that's a way to push it with senior management. In the journalism space, the Dart Centre has done a lot of work around journalists and vicarious trauma, and there are some journalists that have sued their organisations and won for getting PTSD from their journalism work and not being supported enough through their organisations. There are some that haven't won as well, but there is ongoing work in that space, and they're approaching it from a OH&S perspective. So that to me seems the most sort of viable way to do it. But yeah, again, I'm curious whether either Nicola or Michaela wants to say anything around the support that organisations can provide, or what's useful, or again, opening to the floor, and I will check online as well.
We do have 2 questions.
Okay. Sorry. All right.
On slightly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so someone is asking about resources. That's the one we picked up on, but they've written it in a better way, or in a slightly more expanded way. So if time, staffing and space are in short supply, and budget cuts can also affect the optimism and motivation of archivists and others. And so, how do we, on top of all that, then do this type of work? I don't know if anyone wants to.
I've just had a thought that, we talk about the fact that we've necessarily prioritise particular collections, but I'm wondering if archivists are deselecting particular collections by the fact that they know that they're too traumatic and they don't want to deal with them. We've never thought about that.
No, we
before,
haven't.
have we?
No.
Park that one.
Sorry to interrupt yet again. Yeah, we experience this a lot in our field. Self-censorship, effectively, and whether we should be taking that path. And I don't say that in terms of official records, of course, but in terms of photographs and film. We take the position under no circumstances should we, but then there's another level of administrations in terms of what we would call a kind of vicarious embargo, and do we have the right to embargo the reality of war and conflict in the public space? But it's a big question, and one that comes up often,
I'm just going to mention a question here that came through because I think it ties in. The question we got from Emily is, how do you support staff wanting to swap out work they're finding challenging? I personally feel some guilt about handing on difficult or traumatic records to colleagues.
And again, if you're a sole archivist doing everything, you're not swapping it out. So
Absolutely. In our context, we have the privilege of having a few extra people, and what we would do, because we also realise that not everyone is going to be traumatised by the same records. You don't always know when and this will lead to the conversation I think we want to have about lived experience as well. But sometimes we have people who'll go, I'm happy to work with those records. And it's because we have the conversation, it's a bit more, we're more aware of it, but it is much harder when we've got sole archivists.
Also that what is upsetting and what's not can change for people over time. You might find something really distressing, depending on what, again, going back to lived experience, what else is happening in your life at that time, and then in other times it's fine. So it really is variable, I think.
Someone has put in the chat, Deb Ligo has said she's certainly seen large collections left unprocessed and therefore basically inaccessible due to an archivist not wanting and or refusing to undertake A&D. So I think it's definitely happening, which is interesting.
Does this lead into talking about lived experience more broadly? Did you want to talk about that?
Shall we move on to that? Yeah. Do you want to go? Do you mind if I reflect on the conversation we had yesterday? So I've only just started talking about the fact that I am an adoptee. I was forced adoption. I don't work with adoption records anymore. But just note that I have a colleague in the audience who does, and it's been a long journey since we started this for me to actually be. Anyway, the conversation we were having yesterday was about there's a juxtaposition, for want of a better word, that we feel. Very deeply the responsibility of working with these records to make sure that they're looked after properly, to make sure that they're and that people with lived experience feel that, but we're confronting a very real question of whether or not we're the right people to be doing that work. And after 10 years of doing this work, I'm now at the point where I've realised I'm not the right person to be doing this work. I want to make sure that that there's a legacy that I've left. I want to make sure that the things that I've put in place in my workplace are free from policy change, and that will set our profession up. And then, so at the moment, I'm responding to the Aboriginal Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Victoria, and I will see that out, and then I will have to start looking elsewhere. Yeah, it's done its damage.
Well, and you've
I'm the precautionary tale. Didn't I say that when we were?
You did.
Well, I was just thinking
Self-described.
of how many sort of commissions and inquiries and things you've
7.
you've gone through. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat as well. Catherine, thank you, has said she would love a high-level management course or similar. Sorry, I'm flicking between the two.
I was going to say, I think there's a question, and I think it ties in a bit with the discussion we've been having, is Lisa says, I think the relationship you have with your peers makes all the difference. If you know there is an empathetic ear available, then that confidence, the question disappeared.
Oh, no. Oh, it did too.
Did you delete it?
Well, no, I didn't.
No, I can't see it now either. It was there.
Hang
But
on.
yeah, I think it was around peer support and
Yes.
being able to share these things openly in like team meetings and whether it is having a quiet word to a colleague, to debrief or whatever, or whether it's, worth, or, having it. That's another thing we've spoken about before is having issues of well-being and safety on as agenda items in team meetings. That can be super helpful and again kind of formalises it a bit more. So I think that's what it was about, but it has disappeared, which is sad.
Oh, hang on. At the
Can
back.
put it
sorry.
back.
Do you say we've got it? No?
Okay.
I think the relationship you have with your peers makes all the difference. If you know there is an empathetic ear available, then that confidence to share trauma would help work through issues. Being able to raise concerns and have useful responses during team meetings is also important.
Thank you for just clarifying that. Yeah. And yes, again, going back to the management issue, I am all for peer support. If that's useful and, supportive and people feel like that's what they need, that's brilliant. But can management do some stuff too, please? Again, it shouldn't be all on peer support, I think,
And, it's one of those old stories. What does it take? Does it take one of us to actually put in an OH&S claim or a work cover claim for it to start getting raised as an issue for management?
Yeah, absolutely.
But we know those processes are re-traumatising and difficult.
Exactly, yeah.
So
I will say in more of the research space, so we went and spoke at the Australian Historical Association to historians who are obviously dealing with difficult records as well. And someone had been able, I won't get the details right, so I'm looking at Nicola, so hopefully she remembers. Someone had been able to get some traction through their research office in terms of researcher safety for, again, historians working with difficult materials, to the point where they'd added something, I think, to their ethics application.
Yes,
It was part
yes.
of now the ethics application to not only reflect on, if you're talking, if you're interviewing people or whatever, will they be safe during that process, but also will the researcher be safe during that process, which I thought was quite interesting. So that's another mechanism. That's more in the research space, obviously, but yeah, I just thought that was another interesting way but again, I think it's reflecting on OH&S, it's reflecting on those safety concerns and building them into those structures that already exist, but they're not designed for this type of thing, but building it into those. Well, we can move on. We're doing very perfectly for time here. This is, I'm amazed.
Excellent, we pulled it back. I wonder, I don't want to throw the thing out, but whether or not we could extend the conversation back again about lived experience.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It was just me talking.
No, I didn't mean to cut people
no,
off.
it's
I'm
all right.
very sorry.
If no one feels like sharing, I'm happy for us to move on. But
Thank you.
yeah, we do have a hand. Thank you.
Coming from behind.
My name's Tennille Hands. So I come from I've worked in South Africa at the Nelson Mandela Archives, and I work now with UNSW Canberra. I'm responsible for the Australians at War Film Archive, which is an oral history collection. And I think what I find really interesting is that the people in this room are empathetic to these concerns, but it is such a huge cultural shift in our industry. We are trained to be the invisible hand. And so the lived experience to me is really interesting, because I find in all my work I've been so conditioned that my privilege doesn't enable me to be impacted. I don't have the right to have trauma to these trauma reaction to these records, because it's not my experience. I am the one who is making these available. And I think there does need to be a huge shift in our industry, like we've said, with management or generational. The people in this room get it, but the people that aren't attending these sessions don't get it. And it's that training that we have as archivists to get through things, to get through as much as possible, to be the invisible hand, to remove ourselves from the situation as much as possible, because it's not about us, and no one should know that it's about us. How do we change that? Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, positionality is a big thing, isn't it? And that what I reflected on about how much of ourselves, and no one should be expected to reveal things about their life that they don't want to. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We are experiencing it. We are entitled to it. And I don't,
Yes,
that conversation,
absolutely.
I wasn't
Yeah.
about that, sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying that we're just so conditioned into that.
Yeah.
How do we change that culturally?
I think it's actually an even more fundamental shift. It's at the basic level of archives can make you feel things, and you feel good things, and you also feel really distressing things. I feel like that's the actual shift that still needs to happen, and it's not about the records. The records aren't as central as the people that are in the records and the people working on the records. But to me, it is as basic as archives make you feel things. But
That distills it perfectly.
I think it's certainly I think certainly in the literature and things, we're seeing that shift in the way that people write and what they're sharing when they do write and things. I think that human and person-centered aspect and people sharing positionality so that you can understand their perspective and things is something we're seeing come through in a much stronger way than we have before. But I think given the conversations and things that we're having in this room and stuff, it's really getting it into practice. It's such a divide as well about how these things are really happening on the ground and whether we're really able to help people who are having these experiences or representing their communities or, when they're dealing with records and things.
And I think that also goes back to some of the things that Kirsten Thorpe was talking about this morning, is that for workers and archives users, but for workers, archives for a lot of people are still fundamentally unsafe spaces. And so, we absolutely desperately need to diversify the profession, but we have to make sure the profession is safe for people to come into as well. I think
Furious nodding. Yeah. Katrina?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Katrina from Uniting, and I have to say I'm not an archivist. I work closely with archivists. Thank you. I don't know, that's why I'm sort of saying that, because I don't know a lot about the sector, and I'm learning more and I want to learn more. My question is really around training for archivists. I'm social work trained, and that's the heart of our training, and I'm wondering if what happens across information technology courses across Australia, is there any mention of this as part of the training?
Great question. That comes up. It comes up a lot in these discussions, and I think it leads into the next discussion question quite well as well.
Well, I guess, I think it's something we don't have good information on. We know that certain articles get mentioned in certain courses and things like that. I think in terms of an in-depth discussion, you're not going to go into a course and find, you can spend 6 weeks discussing these topics or anything like that. It's part of, it's one small part of a much larger course. So I think there's not a lot.
And I think that's very dependent on who's delivering that course.
In my spare time, I'm a sessional lecturer for Uni SA. And I can say that the students are starting to write papers about it as well, which is great. Whenever I see a student that has chosen it as a topic, even though it's not on the curriculum necessarily, it's fun. It's fun when they quote me in essays that I'm marking. But obviously curriculums are really tight, and the academics responsible for the putting those curriculums together have got really, the environment that they work in is really hard, and I've had conversations with the course coordinators who go, there's no wriggle room. Yeah. So, there've been opportunities where I've been invited to give guest lectures on vicarious trauma and things like that, but it isn't yet, as far as I know, part of anyone's curriculum. Maybe Charles Sturt have got one module on it, I think, but maybe not anymore because...
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anyway, so we've got a long way to go.
I think, as well, it does seem to be happening a little more overseas, like the courses in North America, Canada in particular, some courses in the US. But again, it's very still dependent on a particular lecturer has decided that this is important. So certainly when I went through the archives course however many terrible years ago now, as in terrible because I've been in the profession so long, no mention at all. No mention at all. And so, I think that's, again, something that we're,
even when we were going through it, no.
Not specifically, no. I think that this kind of leads us into this discussion of what still needs to happen in this space. And I guess one of the things that Kirsten and I are currently working on is an international survey looking into the landscape of trauma and archives. And we have partnered with the section on education and training with the International Council on Archives. And the reason we have done that is so that we can provide recommendations to that section to see whether these topics, we're hoping the survey will reveal whether these topics are included in courses currently, and if so, where. And then, look into where the gaps are and what's missing currently. So we're getting a great response to the survey, I should say. We're very appreciative to anyone. If you haven't filled it out, please do.
We will give you the link later on.
It's open a couple more weeks?
It's open till the 26th of October.
Yes.
So
you got another week.
But we'll spruik it at the end.
But the reason, we're really looking into that is because we think it is a missing link in the puzzle, I guess, and because someone mentioned generational change, and it's certainly coming through, I think, with students, and that's what we're hearing as well. It's students and new professionals who are raising these issues a lot more, and when they go into workplaces, they're expecting that support, they're expecting it to be acknowledged, and then they're not finding it. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation over the next few years about what's the role of education, what's the role of kind of ongoing training, and then what's the role of workplaces and the support across those different areas.
Catherine Hall has asked or said, so lecturers need training too, and I think the answer is yes. That's an easy one to answer. Well, it's easy to say yes. What was I going to say? Oh, I had a point. I've forgotten. Oh, sorry, keep going.
So should we open it to the floor to see if anybody has any ideas for or any what's your wish list for what needs to happen in this space? I've been wanting to make a zine for years, so I will do it. I'm making my promise to this group.
I love it.
I remembered what I was going to say. It's about the survey that Nicola and I are doing, just picking up on the point earlier about like we don't know the sort of extent or instances of people's experiences. And I know you were talking specifically about your workplace, but that's part of the reason we're doing this survey as well, because when people ask us, well, what proportion of archivists are affected by this, we don't know. Like anecdotally, we've got lots of people talking to us, but we don't know. So yeah, hopefully we're really hoping we get some data out of this to just say this percentage of people have reported being affected or whatever.
So I'll tell the story of another colleague who works in a different department who I'm not going to name. When I asked them what they're doing around vicarious trauma support for their team, they said, I don't need it, I've got resilient staff. And I said, that's the wrong answer. And because we're resilient until we're not resilient anymore. And we'd never know when that's going to happen. So, yeah.
We need a microphone.
Another thing is in Australian culture is have a drink.
Yeah.
So you see it in Australian culture. I've had that in my experience over the years where, are you okay? Have a nice glass of red. Things like that, this kind of normalisation of alcohol in Australian culture as somehow being a form of therapy within the workplace. It's also something that creeps up in the workplace, as archivists that we have to be aware of, and it's kind of ties in with that, my staff are resilient, they don't, so that's the first thing I thought of when you said that, because it's akin to that kind of, same mentality. Yeah.
We've got a really good question from Lisa. Thinking about bias, being a Caucasian, heterosexual, tertiary educated person means there are strong feelings and hardships that I've not experienced. When coming across evidence of racism, sexism, violence and poverty in my archive, how do I give the same level of care and concern for these items, even when they reveal past wrongdoings? I feel the deep sadness individuals must have felt at time in our school history, and I have to stop and feel about it because it's hurtful and it needs closer inspection. Do you want to take that one first while I give it some thought?
Giving it some thought as well.
I mean, I think it is that real double-edged nature of archives, again, as Kirsten Thorpe was talking about this morning. It's that they are deeply problematic, deeply colonial, deeply patriarchal, terrible language, terrible descriptions of people, etc. But they reveal really critical information as well. And so, I don't know.
I mean, we haven't talked about vicarious sympathisation for a long time, but that is something that we did discuss in the early days, and now it's formed more holistically part of that thinking around trauma-informed practice. But none of us, even those of us with lived experience of particular hardships, don't have, we're going to be working with records that, they provide us with a deeper empathy, but they don't necessarily, we can never put ourselves in someone else's shoes. But it does give us, but we should just, I always remind my staff that the records that reflect my department's records sometimes reflect the really most horrible or traumatic parts of someone's story, but that's not the whole story of that person. And that person needs full respect and just our very best effort to provide them with whatever they need, and that should be primary. That no stone unturned approach to making our collections available to the right people. I think that's how I summarised my last paper as well. So,
Does anyone else have anything to add around, what still needs to happen? Michaela mentioned a wish list of actions or activities.
Hi, I'm Michelle McNamara from Queensland State Archives. As part of my role, we support a lot of students who attend placement with us. And one of the things that strikes me with students often is that they don't have necessarily realistic expectations about what it is that they'll experience when they work as an archivist. And while I don't want to take the joy out of that because we're there for the records in the first place, but students often come expecting to see all the good news stories in records and that they'll be able to reunite people with family history records and all that kind of stuff, but not necessarily having an appreciation for some of the trauma and the darker stories that exist in the records. And so I wonder if one of the things that we need to do in that space is about making sure that people understand what they're signing up to in all its in all its light and shade.
Yeah, I was quite shocked. I actually had a conversation with a history honours student not that long, like earlier this year, and she was like, I want to work in archives because I don't like talking to people and I want to read history all day. I was quite shocked that I thought we'd moved beyond that, and clearly we haven't. So I think that's really important.
I was just thinking as well around the kind of both questions that have been mentioned, and I think it does go back to what Kirsten thought was saying as well about our role of truth telling as well. Like we have the records that got mentioned there, they're really important for sharing, past wrongs, but we need to be sharing those as well, that we have a responsibility to reveal that truth and to show it, even if it is ugly and if it's painful and it's uncomfortable for people to deal with. But that's part of our role as well, and it can be a difficult process. But I think you can look at that with a positive lens as well, is in the outcome and I think sometimes that can help if you're looking at it in a bigger picture or a different frame, that in that moment when you're really struggling, if you're going, but ultimately this is going to be useful.
So when we start working on the ASA's new code of ethics.
Yes.
I was just thinking about something similar when you were speaking, Nicola, and I think it's also really helpful to understand that we can't really second guess how people are going to respond, and that I've sat with people hearing what I thought was really awful stuff, and they've said things like, oh, finally, that explains why they treated me like that, or that explains why I'm here, and so actually I have completely given up. I just give people their records and they do with it as they will, and the key is supporting, being there, and having the skills to not to, my own reaction needs to not be in there. It's a bit like what you were saying. It's not about being invisible or being the invisible hand. It's actually about monitoring my own reaction, and for people's sake, not letting my own stuff, get in there.
Shall we move on in the interest of time? Again, because I feel like it all flows so well together. So our discussions of, and I know we've sort of touched on this as well, but our discussions of trauma, affect and emotional labour in archives still seen as taboo? Are we on our way at all to normalising these concepts? And again, if anyone wants to share or reflect.
Well, I'll just say something, but please put up your hands. I was going to reflect on the fact that I certainly think in certain groups or communities, we are normalising some of these concepts, and then in other communities or areas of the profession, it's like, what? And I say that because as part of the process of the survey that we're doing, I have sent an awful lot of emails to people to encourage them to do the survey, to share the survey, and that's to the international community in different ways. And some people have responded to me being like, I'm so pleased that people are doing this work. I've already done it and I've shared it with a million people. I'm like, amazing, thank you. That's so great. You know, thanks for the support and stuff. And then other people respond and say, I've never thought of this before. You know, and they're experienced professionals, like, or they've got leadership roles or things like that. And
We had someone respond saying, but archives are safe for everyone. Like, if you're not safe in an archive, where are you safe? And I'm just like, again, so yeah, that's certainly,
We need a few people to retire.
I mean, for me, it's also about normalising, again, you know, we've spoken primarily today about vicarious trauma, but normalising discussions of mental health in the workplace more broadly. You know, it's okay to take a mental health day, you know, no questions asked. It shouldn't be a thing. Or just saying, I need to step out, I need to take a walk. You know, all that stuff should be just part of the workplace.
Shall I? Maybe I'll touch briefly on, you know, we've just had a pandemic.
Have we?
We have.
Oh,
how was that for you?
I forgot.
And we realised when, you know, our staff got sent home with short notice like most people, but they were still doing the same work, but they were doing it at home, and sometimes with children, with babies at feet, working with child protection records, with all the same material, during a pandemic, and all of their usual coping mechanisms like that break, walking home from work, all of those sorts of things were gone. And we know, like, you know, the ongoing impact of our resilience and mental health from the pandemic is still going to take years to work through. But what we did was put a very quick worksheet together saying we're aware that this is going to be an issue for you. We're asking you to do this work at home, but we need to make sure that, you know, so we're in very close watch on trying to figure out the best way to support staff while they were doing that work from home.
But yeah, if anyone wants to share or...
No, I just think emotional labour, again, like a lot of staff, a lot of archive staff around the world were anxious because they were separated from their records and couldn't access them in a way that, you know, it meant that a lot of really important work was put on hold.
Come on, you're all doing so well.
There, we've got a hand.
This is the last question as well, so you don't have too much more talking to do.
Okay, well, that's a shame. I think in my workplace it's something we're only just beginning to talk about. I think we've started to talk about the effects of trauma on First Nations staff and visitors, which is really, really important, and I'm so glad that we've started to do that. But I think, this is really the first I've ever heard of it. I'm wondering, just reflecting on my own experience after the bushfires, when I'd come back from work, and, you know, the sky in Canberra was vivid orange, and we were receiving offers from photographers who were themselves caught up in the bushfires. So it was a very kind of current thing. And we decided to accept that material but shut it down so it wasn't publicly available. But the metadata still was, because it was so recent. And I'm not sure if that was really the first time we talked about, I think, you know, maybe controlling how we would take in an acquisition, of digital material, but not making it available because of a traumatic reason. So
there was a really interesting discussion in one of the archives FACey groups recently about that, with a lot of nuance around whether or not we should make things available, and, you know, arguments from both sides of the fence. And it really is, the way that we access the material is, you know, it still requires some thought. You know, I know that staff working with, when they've got material that they're trawling through pre-digitised material and suddenly it's in front of them on a screen, as opposed to, you know, like the haptic influence of the way that we're accessing records needs some thought.
And in relation to that type of thing, the Society of American Archivists has a group, and I'm going to botch the name of it because I can't think. Crisis Collecting Disaster Response.
Disaster response
Working
something,
group type thing. The ASA did have a webinar with them earlier this year, but they're doing some really interesting work, specifically around, how archivists can respond like immediately in disaster zones and things like that. Because from the American perspective, it's, I don't know, I guess it's not something we get exposed to as much here in terms of school shootings and what people do with the records of that in the immediacy. There's often teddy bears and things like, that get left, and then they need to respond to that and stuff. And obviously they've had a lot of, as we have too, natural disasters that they're trying to respond to. And I think that group in particular, I think, are doing some really interesting work in that space. So I think there's some emerging work, I guess, as much as anything else, which is be really interesting to see. And it makes me think that we are moving towards normalising these concepts. I guess I don't know if I'd say they're normalised, but the fact that these groups are existing and these conversations are starting to happen is definitely a shift from my perspective.
But it does seem to be external to workplaces.
Yeah.
Like it is the professional associations or parts of them, or on Facebook or whatever. It's not I'm concerned it's not necessarily feeding through to workplaces, or if it, I don't know.
I think it depends.
It really depends.
Because I'm thinking, spoke with the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and they spoke about their experiences, and that is clearly a very different workplace to something, like a government archives and how they're responding to a similar topic. So I think it's so dependent on the workplace.
The former secretary of my department during the pandemic used to, in her weekly huddle, used to remind us that we're living and leading. And, I think that's probably true for a lot of archivists who are collecting materials actively while the crises are happening or in the immediate aftermath. And
Just to slightly tweak or change the discussion a little bit, one thing we always are a bit curious about is the language right? Like, is stuff like trauma-informed, is that the right words? And so far we've used them because it is a way to link into the broader frameworks around trauma-informed practices. Obviously a lot of resources out there, not specifically designed for archivists, but like they're great. The Blue Knot Foundation was mentioned before, they're fantastic. So there's a lot of stuff out there using that term. It has become a bit of a buzzword, I think. So I think we have to be a bit careful there. But like, is there other language? I guess we've sort of been asking this for a while now and we haven't found any better language, but...
And you're right, and I can't remember who it was at one of the conferences we went to, I think it was Liverpool, where they talked about the deficit paradigm and that we need to be resisting that deficit paradigm because, like I said before, the stories in records are not the whole person and they're not their whole story. So,
and also, as I think you mentioned before, again, where does the resilience come out? If we're always talking about trauma, well, there is a flip side that maybe we need to emphasise more. I don't know. It's interesting.
I think it's interesting because I think the language of trauma-informed practice is actually quite different to the principles on which it sits.
Yes.
Those principles are not using a deficit paradigm, but that heading is, which is confusing and, strange. Whereas if you just speak to those principles, safety, empowerment, collaboration, trust, transparency, Kirsten's going to be like, she's going to forget one. I always forget one. Choice. They're all great principles and they're great words to be using to have these discussions. And so I think that's a bit of an interesting thing as well, because if we're talking about those things and they sit under what is called trauma-informed practice. Have
we got any more questions?
We don't have any more questions.
Any more questions from the room? Elliot.
Thank you. Elliot Freeman, for those who don't know me. On that note, I'm wondering if that idea of that deficit paradigm, sorry, I'm thinking on the fly, it's going to be poorly worded. If we have this idea that the materials are inherently distressing, so there's nothing we can do, when in reality there are potentially supports we can build around them to support people, and maybe there's a sense of almost like a helplessness of that, you know, tough, go deal with them. Yeah, get over it. Whereas reality that we should be building things around them to improve where we can and support where we can.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, that whole sort of what Katrina was saying before, like we shouldn't, I don't think, be withholding things from people because we think they might be distressed by them. Like support absolutely should be provided for both the person working on them and the person receiving them, but like, and that support should look like what it needs to be for that person, but like we absolutely shouldn't be withholding.
And so those two things need to be happening in parallel. We need the things in place to keep ourselves well while we do the work, while at the same time centering the people whose voices we're working for. Yeah. Violet.
Okay. I'm going to try and not be too charged. On that point, I think, and talking about language before, just in my mind, the words like vicarious trauma, affect and emotional labour, I love. I think that really applies to this, but I'm cautious of the use of just trauma and direct trauma generally for archivists who are interacting with this material and not downplaying the lived experience of people in those records and not centering archivists over that lived experience. And it's not about discounting archivists either. It's just both can be true. So that's just my note on the language. I think vicarious trauma, affect, emotional labour, love it. But yeah, cautious about the just use of trauma.
Yeah. And, there's another hand up. There's another hand up over there. I think for me, that's what made the trauma-informed model quite useful, because I'm like, how does this work in all aspects of an archive service for people coming into the archive and then also for people working in an archive. Also, we haven't really spoken about those sort of liminal positions like volunteers, donors, you know, that sort of stuff is a whole issue. But anyway, sorry.
I just had a comment about resilience and trauma. I guess resilience is a continuum. Yes. You don't have to be totally resilient. Like, or, you know, I think that people go in and out of resilience, you know, they can be very resilient and not so resilient.
Absolutely.
And sometimes trauma can be, or vicarious trauma, can be quite, people can feel a lot and sometimes not. There's a continuum on all these, and I guess it's helping people to know where they're at and be able to, and actually building the, as you say, the resources around recognizing where they're at and being able to step back and step out.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really important point. And because, we all feel different every day, you know, and so, as we sort of said, I think it depends on what else is going on for people in their lives and what's happening in the world. There's pandemics and, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we need to, I guess part of this, and I think this is why we do want it to be in education and things, is so much is about raising awareness to start with, that it's even possible. Yes. That then, so it's kind of that like multifaceted approach. Like, you know, it could be a bit preventative because some people are going to end up in roles, you know, that they wouldn't have gone for if they'd thought, you know, or if they'd known that these types of impacts could happen to them. And then, but then we need the workplace support as well to be there. So if it's needed, there's something people can go to. They're not trying to argue for it at that time when they're already in a distressed state. Yeah. So.
Do you want to move to the next slide? If you can work the clicker. So just to finish off, what I'm going to try and do, so I think for people in the room, you can access as well, in the discussion forum for this session, I'm going to try and paste those links into the discussion forum. Oh my God, it's happening in real time. Look at this. This is fascinating. Hopefully, did that work?
So these are just all the things that we mentioned earlier, I guess, that you can...
Oh, there we go. I think it worked.
Wow.
I think it worked. Which is just because the links are, like, especially that survey link is horrible and you won't remember it, and that's fine. But for those who don't know, there is the online course, which is called A Trauma-Informed Approach for Managing Archives. It's self-paced. You can come and go. You don't have to do it in one go. There's lots of links to lots of things. There's videos and all sorts of things.
Join the trauma-informed community.
Join the trauma-informed archives community of practice. So if you go to that link that's on the slide, it then links you to the Discord that you can join. The next meeting should be in November, and I believe we're talking about like lobbying management strategies.
So. Yeah.
That was Michaela's idea.
It was.
Yeah.
Am I going to be in hospital?
Oh, we should talk about
We
that.
should talk about that.
Hopefully it'll be in November. But yeah, they are kind of early in the morning, so I do apologise in advance. But yeah, there's, as I said, lots of great resources there as well that people have shared and articles and things, so really good. Yeah, we are running workshops at the moment, implementing trauma-informed archival practice. They're mostly been online, so yeah, if you want to attend those, they've mostly been online so far. We're doing some in person, but mostly online. But yeah, it's been great running those workshops because it's, yeah, I guess really shown the interest in this area and the need for action in this area, but also that there is some quite practical stuff people can go back to their organisations and do. And so the discussions are always really, really fruitful and really, yeah, really generates a lot of stuff. And yeah, the survey that we mentioned. So yeah, I'm sorry about that terrible link, but please go and do it if you haven't done it already. Please share. It will close on October the 26th. We've had a really great response, but yeah, please.
And if you can't find it, if you go to ica.org, it's like the first thing that comes up on their website at the moment, so that might be a quicker way.
And it's pinned at the top of your Twitter account, isn't it?
Yeah. Also another way.
And you can do it in French and Spanish as well.
Just
so
in case.
In case you're, well, not so, I assume people in the room will probably do it in English, but like if you do have colleagues that would prefer to respond in French or Spanish, they can do that as well.
What's trauma in French?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's
Anyone?
just trauma. I think it's just trauma.
General consensus is it's just trauma.
We're just summing up now.
Can we ask one last throw it out to the, before we make our finishing comments? Any kind of, anything burning that's come up that you haven't had a chance to? I just want to make a personal shout out to the two of you for like taking this and running with it in such a fantastic, like the resources that we have now, the survey that's coming out and the data that's going to come out of that is really exciting, and I'm very proud of you both.
Oh, thanks, Michaela.
Well, it would only have happened because we had the initial chat in a pub one day. So talking of a drink, like, you know, maybe they're not the right approach, but we've moved on beyond the drink and we've brought it to the professional sense. So, you know, but I think it, you know, we talk a lot about peer support in the conversations we have, and, you know, it's the way that people are having success in having some of these conversations. But I don't think any of us have ever presented really alone in a professional sense on this topic. We always do it as a collaborative thing, you know, and I think that means a lot.
And when we presented with Proscovia and Jennifer Douglas at ICA in Adelaide, they were both people who had presented alone a lot, and the value of presenting with us was really revealed. Katrina?
But two things. Just in terms of the word trauma, I really loved what you said, Kirsten, about archives make you feel things, and that's a really good way to sort of avoid the word trauma if you're wanting to. The second thing, I just want to mark what you said, Michaela, to thank you for sharing what you said about yourself, and to just mark what you actually said, which is that you're going to be leaving. And as someone who's known you for a long time,
not yet, but
good, but you have said that you know you're on your way out, and I just wanted to really mark that you'd said that and not ignore it. And
thank you.
And
not out of the profession, by the way.
No, I understood that. I understood that. But yeah, really, it's just about marking that.
Thank you.
And
that's very kind.
I just wanted to respond to Lisa on the app, who has asked, can we access this slide presentation outside of the conference? I mean, you can, Lisa. We're happy to send it to you. There's not much in there. Very happy for you to share those links that we've shared.
And it's being recorded, isn't it?
There's our emails if you want to get in touch.
Yeah, there we go. So it's being recorded. But yeah, I think, if this is... get in touch if there's more useful stuff we can give you as well, because whether this presentation is useful, whatever. But yeah, get in touch if needed.
We're always happy to have a chat.
Always. I mean, 90 minutes wasn't enough, was it? No. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to everybody that shared. Thank you to everyone that didn't. Thank you to everyone listening online.
Yeah, just to call out some people who've been in the chat all the way through. Catherine Hall, Lisa Perriam, Deb Lego, and yeah, thanks for your questions from online people as well. So
thanks.
Yeah.
Doing like little clappy emojis on the app. Like, oh, it's exciting.
But yeah, I think we're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah, unless
Thanks,
anyone
everyone.
has anything.